Okay, so here we go. As you can see, the title of today's presentation is Exploring Stress, Worry, and Anxiety. This is going to be the first in our series that's titled Maintaining Mental Health in Times of Uncertainty. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Katrina Lutho. I am the training specialist here at Donate Life Northwest. I work primarily in our Erase the Weight program, which is our Living Kidney Mentorship program. However, my academic background is rooted in psychology and professional mental health, which makes me particularly passionate about bringing you this webinar series. So as I mentioned already, I think a few folks have joined us since then, so just note that I have placed everybody on a universal mute. I am hoping that I've saved time for questions at the end, at which time I'll unmute folks if you choose to participate in that Q&A or just have general comments or discussion. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at today's learning objectives. So today we will be exploring the differences between stress, worry, and anxiety. We will broaden our understanding of how stress, worry, and anxiety affect us physically, mentally, and emotionally. We will learn to become more attuned to our individual experiences of stress, worry, and anxiety. We'll gain some coping tools to help reduce our experiences of these states, and we will become familiar with 6 self-care basics that help prevent excessive stress, worry, and anxiety. So we'll begin by discussing stress, worry, and anxiety within the specific context of the current COVID-19 pandemic. So why is this health crisis so triggering? It's likely obvious from communicating with friends, family, and coworkers over the past several weeks that stress, worry, and anxiety levels are high for many of us. It may seem silly to ask why, considering that the answer is obvious. We're in the midst of an unprecedented global health crisis. However, understanding the elements that make a situation like this so triggering is helpful both in terms of validating and normalizing our reactions and our emotions. So there are 3 particular aspects of situations that create strong triggers for stress, worry, and anxiety, and the current COVID-19 crisis happens to check all 3 of those boxes. Those 3 triggers are, first of all, the situation is ambiguous, meaning it is unclear or inexact due to more than one interpretation. So for instance, throughout the crisis, there have been contradictory and confusing guidelines around wearing masks. The second aspect, hang on just a moment here. I'm getting a message that my slides aren't showing, so just a moment here. Let me just check if I can try to do this again. Okay, so I should be seeing my slides now. So thank you for the heads up from my coworker, Marissa. Hold on just a second here. Okay, we'll just leave it at that. Okay, so as I was saying, this current COVID situation meets these 3 check boxes for situations that tend to really increase worry, anxiety, and stress. The first being that it is an ambiguous situation. The second being that it is novel and new, making it impossible to reflect back on prior experiences for comparison, guidance, or comfort. So as previously mentioned, a pandemic of this type of global scale has not occurred in our lifetimes, making everything about it unfamiliar. The last of the three triggers is that the situation is unpredictable, meaning that it is unclear how things will turn out. So for instance, you only need to do a quick scan of current media to see there are widely varying projections in terms of severity of the virus, spread, and the duration of the situation. So who may be more likely to experience higher levels of worry and anxiety during a health crisis? It's inevitable that all of us are negatively impacted by the current worldwide health situation in some way, but some of us are more likely to experience intrusive levels of stress, worry, and anxiety due to COVID-19. Some of these individuals and groups are elders, medical professionals, mental health practitioners, first responders, social workers, and individuals from marginalized communities. It also be particularly impactful for folks with chronic diseases, compromised immune systems, mental health conditions, active substance abuse, family members who are at high risk for contracting COVID, and folks who have a history of trauma. So now that we know a little bit about why we are collectively experiencing high levels of stress, worry, and anxiety, let's learn a bit more about each of them. We'll begin by exploring the question, aren't stress, worry, and anxiety the same thing? Spoiler alert, they are not. So first of all, what is stress? Stress is a psychological response connected to an external threat or stressor, such as this angry mountain lion in the photo here. Some levels of stress are necessary for all living systems. It is the means by which they encounter and respond to the challenges and uncertainties of existence. Stress is experienced when the perception of danger sets off an automatic nervous system response known as fight, flight, or freeze. Flight meaning meet the threat, flight meaning flee from the threat, and freeze meaning essentially play dead. So how exactly do we experience stress? Stress is the normal part of life, as I said. You experience stress as a bodily reaction to any change that requires an adjustment or response. The body reacts to these changes with physical, mental, and emotional responses. You can experience stress in response to your environment, your body, and your thoughts. Even life changes that are positive, such as a promotion, a birth of a child, or the anticipation of a vacation, still produce stress. So, since stress is a normal part of life, how do we know when it becomes problematic? Life-saving as the stress response is, it is meant to solve short-term, life-threatening problems, not extended difficulties such as the current health crisis. Prolonged or repeated arousal of the stress response can have harmful physical and psychological consequences, including anxiety. Individuals with a history of post-traumatic stress disorder, physical or sexual assault, accidents, experiencing natural disasters, childhood trauma, or living through many stressful life events may be prone to a more exaggerated stress response. So now let's take a look at what exactly worry is. Worry is what happens when your mind dwells on negative thoughts, uncertain outcomes, or things that could go wrong. Worry is mind-based and focused primarily on thoughts in our head. Worry can be positive as it often prompts problem solving or action taking. In terms of how we experience worry, when we worry, it can feel like a chain of thoughts and images which can progress in increasingly catastrophic and unlikely directions. Some of us experience worry as uncontrollable and it seems to take on a life of its own. Due to the current health crisis, it's natural that many of us have recently noticed ourselves thinking about worst-case scenarios. The worry chain pictured here illustrates how worries can escalate quickly, even from something relatively minor. In this example, the worrier progresses from, I have a headache, to what if it's coronavirus, to maybe I passed it on to everyone at work yesterday, to everyone will pass it on and die, and finally the worrier begins to imagine an apocalypse and losing everyone they know and love. This phenomenon of worry chain thinking is also sometimes referred to as spiraling. I personally describe the experience as a worry slideshow because our thoughts tend to move quickly from one to the next as our worry increases, much like clicking through photos in a slideshow. So when does worry become problematic? Humans have this amazing ability to think about future events. Thinking ahead means that we can anticipate obstacles or problems and gives us the opportunity to plan solutions. When it assists us in achieving our goals, thinking ahead can be helpful. However, worrying is a way of thinking ahead that often leaves us feeling anxious or apprehensive. As we already saw, when we worry excessively, we often think about worst-case scenarios. This type of thinking results in feeling as though we won't be able to cope and sometimes leads to a sense of lack of control or helplessness. A sense of lack of control or helplessness is a key component to anxiety, which we will be exploring next. So what is anxiety? Now we know a little bit more about stress and worry, so let's explore this last topic of the day. Like stress and worry, some level of anxiety is normal as a part of everyday life. Anxiety is the mind and body's reaction to stressful, dangerous, or unfamiliar situations. It's the sense of uneasiness, distress, or dread that you feel before a significant event. A certain level of anxiety helps us stay alert and aware. However, when anxiety becomes persistent and overwhelming, as it is in the case of an anxiety disorder, it can be completely debilitating. Anxiety takes you out of the present moment and into a state of worry about past events, which can also be described as ruminating, or a fixation on hypothetical future challenges or negative outcomes, also known as catastrophizing. Anxious thoughts are typically negative in focus and centered around fear. Anxiety also tends to make us fretful and fills us with a sense of uneasiness. Much like worry, which is actually categorized as a component of anxiety, anxious thoughts often come quickly, shifting from one to the next and become increasingly worst-case scenario focused. Unlike worry, which can prompt problem-solving and generate action, anxiety typically results in avoidance of the stimulus that triggered the anxious thought. So when does anxiety become problematic? A hallmark aspect of problematic anxiety is an irrational dread and/or fear of situations. For instance, seemingly mundane tasks such as opening mail, making phone calls, or going to the grocery store may feel extremely overwhelming and cause panic. Anxiety-based worry is constant and unsubstantiated. It causes significant distress and interferes with your daily life. Problematic anxiety also often results in avoidance of people, places, and important tasks that prompt an anxious reaction. Panic attacks can also occur when a state of excessive anxiety is present, often leading to additional fear and dread of having another panic attack. It is important to note that anxiety disorders are the most common and pervasive mental disorders in the United States. So now that we know stress, worry, and anxiety are similar in nature, but also have their own unique features, let's examine how these three states of being affect our bodies, minds, and emotions. Stress, worry, and anxiety can disrupt our lives in multiple ways. If you notice any of these emotional symptoms, or mental symptoms, it may be a sign that you are experiencing problematic levels of stress, worry, or anxiety. First is negative changes in mood or mood swings. Then we have loss of optimism, depression, feeling overwhelmed, racing thoughts, memory or concentration issues, an inability to put stress in long-term perspective or see the bigger picture, or an increase in anger, irritability, short-temperedness, or substance use. It's important to note that you might not experience all of these. You may only experience one or two, but the main thing to focus on is if the symptoms you are experiencing are disrupting your daily life and causing you distress. So what about physical symptoms of worry, stress, and anxiety? It's extremely important to understand that these three states don't just impact us mentally and emotionally. When they become excessive, we feel them in our bodies too. Our bodily responses to stress are widespread and involve multiple systems, from metabolism to muscles to vision. As you can see, there's a long list on this slide. I am going to read them all off because I feel like it is often really overlooked that many of these symptoms are associated with anxiety, worry, and stress. Of course, it's important to note that these symptoms can also be indicating some sort of physical ailment, so always, of course, be checking in with your medical professionals. But some of the physical symptoms that you see when stress, worry, anxiety are high, or when you're experiencing them chronically, are dizziness or a general feeling of being out of it, general aches and pains, grinding of the teeth or clenching your jaw, headaches, indigestion, upset stomach, diarrhea, acid reflux, increase in or loss of appetite, lowered immune function, in other words, getting sick more frequently or having illness last longer than normal, restlessness and an inability to relax, bladder or bowel urgency, dry mouth, muscle tension in neck, face, or shoulders, problems sleeping, racing heart, cold and sweaty palms, tiredness or exhaustion, trembling or shaking, weight gain or weight loss, changes to vision such as tunnel vision or vision becoming sharper, feeling easily fatigued, and shallow breathing. So again, you can see that this is quite a comprehensive list, but I do feel it's very important to be aware that these various physical symptoms can be indications of high levels of stress, worry, and or anxiety. So why do these symptoms occur? Many of the symptoms we experience under the influence of stress, worry, and anxiety are due to our nervous system attempting to protect us from danger. For instance, a faster heartbeat feeds more blood to our muscles and enhances our ability to fight or run. Vision can become more acute so that more attention can be paid to the stressor. And our thoughts race because quicker thinking helps us evaluate danger and make rapid decisions. So in other words, when thinking of these physical manifestations of stress, worry, and anxiety, it's important to remember that primal fight, flight, freeze response that's happening, and that our brain and body don't know the difference between being chased by a saber-toothed tiger or being upset because someone cut you off in traffic, or being worried because we are in a scary state of things. So what about stress, worry, and anxiety in terms of pre-existing health conditions? That is definitely a special category, as these states are likely to exacerbate any chronic health condition that's influenced by the nervous system. This is not an extensive list, but some of the examples are chronic pain, IBS, digestive disorders, and headaches. There are also serious long-term impacts of chronic stress, worry, and anxiety, which include risk for high blood pressure, heart disease, stroke, and premature death. In fact, in 2010, a study examining how psychological distress affects cardiovascular outcomes suggested that cardiac patients with a so-called type D personality, a personality type characterized by chronic stress and distress, face higher risks of bad outcomes. So far we've learned a lot about the negative ways stress, worry, and anxiety can impact us, which can understandably feel a bit overwhelming. So now let's shift our attention to how we can minimize the disruptive presence of these forces in our lives. One of the most powerful things you can do to help minimize stress, worry, and anxiety is to become familiar with your unique experience of these states. The more you understand about how these states affect you personally, the more you will be able to minimize them. It is a prime example of knowledge is power. There are 4 primary areas of focus when it comes to getting to know your stress, worry, and anxiety, and we will go through a brief overview of each one. First thing you'll want to explore are the situations that cause you to experience high levels of stress, worry, or anxiety. This will help you become aware of your triggers. You can do this through a general reflection on times you've experienced excessive stress, worry, or anxiety, but it's often more fruitful to look back on a specific instance. When doing so, ask yourself the following questions. Who was I? What was I doing? Where was I? When did it happen? As we have already discussed, the mental, emotional, and physical expressions of stress, worry, and anxiety are wide-ranging. When getting to know your experiences with these states, it's imperative to become aware of how you experience them within your mind and body. Each of us has our own buffet, our own unique buffet of stress, worry, and anxiety symptoms, many of which we may not even associate with one or more of these states. To learn more about how these states impact you personally, reflect on a recent experience of worry, stress, or anxiety. Try to pick something that happened within the last day the memory is fresh. Do your best to place yourself back into that state of being and ask yourself the following. What emotions did I experience? What was the intensity of these emotions on a scale from 1 to 10? What changes did I notice in my body? What was the intensity of these bodily sensations on a scale from 1 to 10? The next element of your stress, worry, and anxiety to explore are the thoughts or internal narratives that occur when you are in one of these states. Again, try to pick something that happened within the last day or two and ask yourself, what was I thinking about? What was I predicting would happen? How strongly did I believe my thoughts and predictions on a scale from 1 to 10? What self-talk accompanies these thoughts? The last thing to examine is your current coping responses to stress, worry, and anxiety. You may currently be coping in a maladaptive way, such as avoidance or substance abuse, or you may already be using healthy coping tools consciously or subconsciously. Again, reflect on a recent event during which you found yourself in one of these states and ask, how did I cope with what I was feeling? What actions did I take? Did I consciously decide to take these actions? How effective was my coping response on a scale of 1 to 10? It can be extremely helpful with these 4 areas of examining your stress, worry, and anxiety to do these questions and answers in a way that you're documenting them, whether that is a journal. There's also a lot of forms you can find for free online that allow you to ask yourself these questions about your stress, worry, anxiety experiences and document them. The reason that that documentation can be helpful is just that it gives you more information and also allows you to better identify patterns that might be occurring, things that are or aren't working in terms of coping, or areas that you feel like you need to do some more data gathering. So another essential element of minimizing experiences of excessive stress, worry, and anxiety is to engage in frequent acts of self-care. It can be easy to feel as though self-care is burdensome, pointless, or takes too much time. However, it is truly a crucial element of maintaining overall happiness and well-being. Often, to get the appropriate amount of self-care in on a consistent basis, we need to reconceptualize and simplify our understanding of what self-care is, what it looks like for us. One of my favorite antidotes when it comes to self-care was when I was in graduate school, and we were always being told how important it was to engage in self-care, which anybody who has been to graduate school knows is pretty much impossible while you're within the academic rigors of that particular situation. And in one class, we had a professor who, did the spiel about self-care, to which she received a huge universal groan. And she didn't let it slide. She dug in there and really made us have a conversation about self-care, and helped us to reconceptualize self-care in a way that made us realize it can be little simple acts that you do for yourself throughout the day. It was quite mind-opening for me as I heard some of my classmates, conceptualize self-care as things like listening to their favorite music while they're getting ready in the morning, or taking the longer route home from school that's more scenic and relaxing. So it is very important as we go through these 6 self-care basics to think about how you can easily incorporate some of these aspects into your daily life without it feeling burdensome. Also important to be able to identify things that you're already doing in any of these categories that perhaps you're not thinking of as self-care. So in terms of these 6 basic areas, or 6 basics of self-care, simplifying things down, the first is caring for your body, which includes eating healthy meals, drinking water, getting plenty of sleep, and avoiding or minimizing intake of alcohol and other toxins such as marijuana, cigarettes. The second is to practice gratitude, to start a written or verbal daily gratitude practice to help you connect with positivity, joy, and vitality. I fully acknowledge this is one that is kind of getting overplayed in self-help arenas and on social media, but there is a lot of very long-term and grounded empirical research on the correlation between practicing daily gratitude and overall happiness. It has really been identified as a core component of human happiness. The next is to be sure that you're connecting with others. Given our current situation of quarantine, self-isolation, stay-at-home, shelter-in-place, we are a lot more disconnected than usual. So being sure that you're being intentional about reaching out to friends and family, and that also when you're doing that, you are allowing that to be a place of emotional vulnerability where you are sharing your feelings and helping to strengthen your support system. It's wonderful that in this day and age, we have a lot of technology that allows us to connect with our loved ones. I've heard even just through my coworkers here at Donate Life Northwest some creative ways of connecting through video conferencing, of playing games as a family through a video connection. So there's definitely a lot of things that you can do there. Me and one of my friends have an art date coming up that we're going to do through a Zoom connection. So getting creative and making sure that the kind of voluntary isolation that we're in right now doesn't become an internalized isolation as well. Next up is to set a routine. I think this is particularly important in our current state of most of us staying largely in our homes. Many of us are working remotely from home. So creating a daily structure, maintaining a regular routine, and sticking to a schedule to help you feel more in control of your life. I also highly encourage, as you are creating that daily structure, to be sure that you are incorporating these other aspects of self-care into that regular routine that you're creating for yourself. Another thing about self-care that I always advise is to get the most bang for your buck. So if you can engage in an act of self-care that hits multiple of these points, all the better. So if, for instance, maybe you start a gratitude practice that you engage in with your other family members, or maybe you are cooking healthy meals with your family members. So, trying to kind of get a 2-for-1 or 3-for-1 self-care out of one activity. Next on the list is staying active, and that helps really maintain motivation, which is crucial at this current time. So this is incorporating activities that keep both your mind and your body moving. So oftentimes when we think about staying active, we're thinking more about our physical self, but equally important to be exercising your mind and your brain as well. So, some of things that we can do from our currently quarantined situation are things like taking online courses, doing some of the brain training games that you can get on your mobile devices, doing some exercise videos or streaming of exercise, or going on good old-fashioned nature walks. The last but definitely not least on the self-care list here is to take breaks. In our current situation, it can feel extremely imperative to constantly check news for updates on the pandemic, but doing so can be a really big trigger for anxiety. So the advice here is to set limits on your daily media intake and to take breaks, to be intentional about unwinding, breathing, and grounding yourself. So I don't have a slide for this next one, but because I've been talking fast and moving through this at a faster speed than I thought I would, I'm going to go ahead and throw in a couple of really easy grounding techniques that you can use. I did post these recently on the Donate Life Northwest social media. So for any of you who saw that post, I apologize if this is repetitive. But the grounding piece is so important for multiple reasons. But sometimes the thing that gets the clarity of the importance across the most is to go back to that idea we were talking about earlier of the fight, flight, freeze response. And to remember that what is happening there is a full-scale nervous system activation. Everything in all parts of your body and all parts of your brain are activated. They are in a survival mode. And that survival mode makes it impossible to have clarity of thought, to do problem solving, to do thinking about our emotions, how we're feeling. It leaves us with just kind of the most basics of, I'm going to get myself out of this life-threatening situation. So the grounding piece is a way to deregulate all of that nervous system activation. So if we're able to, for instance, get in some really deep belly breaths, some diaphragmatic breathing, like you would do for yoga or Lamaze, that sends a contradictory message to our brain. Our brain is thinking saber-toothed tiger's trying to eat us. If we're able to get those calm breaths in, our brain thinks, well, wait a minute. If a saber-toothed tiger is trying to eat us, why do we have time to take these luxurious deep breaths right now? And just that little juxtaposition gives us a chance to regulate a little bit and get some of our higher thinking capacity back on deck so that we can do some rationalization, be able to realize I am in an anxious state right now, and to be able to dig into our coping tools. So there are two ways that are really simple that I really like to use myself and also have helped other people learn to use in terms of a quick grounding way to distract yourself from some of that anxious state and be able to get some of those higher thinking skills back on deck. The first one is to pick a color, and then in whatever environment you're in, this one's great because it works inside, outside, whatever environment you're in, simply try to locate and count as many things of that color as you possibly can. It can be helpful with both of these grounding exercises that I'm going to explain to try to incorporate breathing if you are able to. So for instance, when I use this color counting technique, I like to, as I count, also breathe. 1, do a deep breath in, deep breath out. 2, do a deep breath in, deep breath out. The other really simple grounding technique is to engage all of your senses. Again, it's that same theory of trying to deregulate some of that nervous system activity, become more present in the here and now and within your body. So doing this is just simply engaging each of your 5 senses. What do I see right now? What do I hear right now? What do I feel right now? What do I smell right now? I feel like that was only 4, but you get the idea. So again, that helps bring you back into the here and now. And also, as I said, if you can incorporate some of the deep breathing while you're going through that grounding exercise, all the better. So as we are heading into the home stretch here, I'd just like to provide a gentle reminder to ask for help if you are experiencing disruptive or uncontrollable levels of worry, stress, or anxiety. Some people that you can talk to would be a counselor or therapist, your primary care doctor, a spiritual leader. There are a number of different crisis helplines that are happy to help and support you. It's fairly easy to find crisis lines targeted for different groups, such as veterans, seniors, folks struggling with substance addiction, adolescents. So taking advantage of those resources. And then, of course, us here at Donate Life Northwest are always happy to support and help our community members as well in any way that we can. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, anxiety is the most common mental health disorder, quote unquote, in the United States. I would say that it also often goes undiagnosed and or untreated. Part of that is because people's unwillingness to share what they're experiencing. Part of that is due to very pervasive mental health stigma in our country. And I think another piece of that is that there is a lot of assumption that some of these experiences are normal. We need to just, tighten up our bootstraps and deal with it. But when these states are impacting your life in a negative way, it is time to try to do something about it. And oftentimes that does mean getting some help and support. So at this point, I will go ahead and open things up to questions, discussion. So I am going to be unmuting or deactivating the universal mute at this point in time. So if you happen to know that you have a lot of background noise or if you are not planning to participate in this section, if you can go ahead and manually remute yourself, that would be great, just to keep the distractions down to a minimum. So everybody is muted. So does anybody have any questions or comments? Cricket. Any questions or comments out there? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. Please know that I'm happy to receive questions or comments via email as well. I will be following up this session with an email. It will include a link to the recording. I will also include a resources handout. It will have links to many of the resources I used to put together this presentation, which I feel could be extremely helpful for. Also want to remind you that this webinar is the first in a 4-part series. So the next session will take place this same time, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m.-ish Pacific time, and that will be next Thursday on April the 16th. The next session will be focused specifically on boosting self-care and self-compassion. So I'll be going a lot more in depth in terms of self-care, how to incorporate various different types of self-care into your life, looking more in depth at the various different areas of self-care that ideally we are incorporating. Also looking at self-compassion and how that plays a very large role in not only our overall well-being and happiness and life satisfaction, but also in reducing a lot of stress, worry, anxiety. For any of us who have struggled with anxiety, we know that there is often a pretty harsh self-talk, self-narrative that comes along with it. We tend to not be very kind to ourselves when we are experiencing chronic states of anxiety, stress, worry. Some of that, which I feel does go back to my previous comment of just that we're not, quote unquote, supposed to be feeling that way according to our societal rules. So boosting self-care and self-compassion next week, Thursday the 16th, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. I haven't quite opened the registration for that one yet. So once I get that registration up and going, I will put that link in the follow-up email as well. We will also be posting about that webinar on our social media. So that is it. Thank you so much for joining us today, and take care and be well. Have a good day, everyone.